My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 34 years old, and apparently in my family. That makes me the designated problem solver/wallet. I should have known how the night would unravel the moment I stepped into the banquet hall, balancing a custom strawberry cream cake in one hand and my buzzing phone in the other. I hadn't even changed out of my work clothes. My blazer still had crumbs from lunch. But it was Mom's 60th birthday, and despite every sign telling me to take a step back, I showed up just like always. The hall looked stunning silver balloons arching across the ceiling, white orchids in glass vases, and table cards that probably took someone hours to print. My sister Charlotte made sure everyone knew she planned it all. "Oh, look," she said, spotting me across the room with a laugh too loud to be innocent. The family wallet finally showed up. Some guests chuckled. A few glanced at their drinks. I gave a tight-lipped smile, pretending I hadn't heard. But then Uncle Rick, yes, the same one who still owes me $2,000 from helping him out during his divorce, clinked his glass and raised it high. "To the child who gives the most, but matters the least," he announced with a wink. The room held its breath, and then it exhaled in awkward giggles. Even Mom just smiled and said, "Don't make a scene, sweetheart. It's my day." I stood there frozen, the cake now resting on the dessert table beside a stack of mismatched cookies. I felt something inside me crack quietly, but irreparably. They weren't joking. They meant it. I wasn't the reliable one. I wasn't the one who showed up in emergencies or quietly paid overdue bills. No, I was just the bank account with a face. I had covered the venue's deposit after Mom's card got declined, and now I was covering the balance in full another favor I was never asked about, just expected to handle. So I did what I always do, I paid. Only this time, I didn't say anything. I walked to the reception desk, pulled out the envelope I'd brought from my coat pocket, and placed it gently on the counter. Then I turned and walked out. No goodbye. No confrontation. Just silence. By the time I reached my car, the laughter from the hall had already been swallowed by the night. I drove home with the radio off, my phone still buzzing every few minutes. I didn't check it. Not yet. An hour later, everything unraveled. The venue's power shut down. The DJ left. Staff started packing up. Mom's perfect party came to a grinding halt. Apparently, the envelope I'd left never made it to the manager's hands. It simply vanished. By the time I changed into sweatpants and curled up with a glass of wine, my phone had exploded with over 30 messages. Charlotte's texts came first, accusations masked as questions. "Where did you go then? Did you even pay the venue? And then, are you trying to ruin everything?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I was tired. Tired of being expected to rescue everyone and being spat on when I did. Cousins chimed in. One text read, "Seriously, you just left another. The power went out. The party's over. What the hell happened?" The family group chat was chaos. Aunts and uncles demanding answers. Charlotte telling everyone that I had promised to pay. Uncle Rick again asking if I bailed for dramatic effect. Through all this, Mom posted one short message: "Let's not turn this into drama. Please." She didn't defend me. She didn't deny the accusations. She just tried to maintain the image. I finally responded. One message. I said I left the envelope at the reception. If it wasn't there, someone else took it. That was all. Then I muted the chat and turned my phone face down. For the first time in years, I didn't second-guess myself. I didn't replay the scene in my head, wondering if I should have smiled through it. Laughed it off. Accepted the humiliation like I always had. Something had shifted, deeply. I realized I had been absorbing the cost, financial, emotional, psychological, of being the strong one for far too long. And every time I tried to set a boundary, I was painted as cold, ungrateful, even cruel. But what none of them seemed to understand was that kindness has a limit. and mine had just been reached. I didn't explode. I didn't scream. I just opted out. Quietly, finally. The next morning, the venue called. A polite woman informed me that the envelope I left was sitting safely in their office the entire time. No one from my family had even bothered to check. They simply assumed I had failed. Because that's easier. That fits the story they've always told themselves, that I'm only valuable when I'm giving. And invisible when I'm not. I thanked her and hung up. I didn't forward the message to the family chat. I didn't owe them that. By Monday, the silence was deafening. Not the peaceful kind, but the sharp-edged, passive-aggressive exile kind. My cousin Lily, the only one I still spoke to, texted me a warning. There's a Zoom meeting tonight. Everyone's trying to make sense of what happened. You're not invited. Just so you know, they're twisting the story. I thanked her. She added, "My mom didn't exactly defend you either, and I believed it. That's the thing, they weren't wrong to think it was a statement. It was just not the kind they assumed. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't some tantrum. It was clarity. I was done being the cushion for their consequences. Done being the plan B that always says yes. I didn't want back in. I wanted out. And the more I sat with that, the lighter I felt. Not lonely, not bitter, just free. But what came next, I didn't see coming. After the birthday disaster, the Monroe family went into damage control mode. Charlotte took the reins, of course, sending out long-winded texts about miscommunication and how Rachel must have misunderstood something, completely ignoring the fact that I had paid. Uncle Rick posted an old photo of Mom with the caption, "She deserved better than that night," conveniently leaving out that he'd raised a toast mocking me. And through it all, Mom radio silence. Not a call, not even a "Hey, are you okay?" It was funny. I'd been accused of trying to ruin the party, but no one seemed interested in checking the facts. No one called the venue. No one asked the front desk. They just turned me into a villain because it was easier. Because the idea of me choosing not to carry the burden shook them more than any forgotten payment ever could. The truth was simple. I didn't forget. I didn't lash out. I simply left. But the family narrative shifted anyway. The whispers became concrete. In a group text I was no longer part of, someone said I'd always been dramatic, that I just wanted attention. Charlotte chimed in to say I had a history of weaponizing money, a phrase so sharp, so precise. I actually laughed out loud, as if years of quietly covering rent, hospital bills, school supplies, and emergencies without ever bringing it up was some act of emotional warfare. It wasn't long before I started getting secondhand guilt deliveries, little messages disguised as concern. "We're worried about you. Rachel, you seemed off that night. You know family's messy, but still family, right? None of it felt real. None of it felt like love." The most honest message came from Jenna, my cousin from Mom's side. She was younger, more observant, and less entangled in the Monroe drama. She messaged, "I saw you drop off the envelope. You didn't do anything wrong. They just need someone to blame." I stared at that text for a long time. It didn't fix anything, but it was the only message that made me feel seen. And then, 5 days after the party, a white envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address, handwritten. I knew that penmanship like the lines on my own palm. It was from Mom. I sat with it unopened for an hour, maybe 2. I wasn't afraid of what was inside. I just wasn't sure I was ready for another deflection. Another, "Let's move on." Another, "But you know they love you." Love. When I finally opened it, I read every word twice, and I felt every line settle in my bones. She wrote that she had been embarrassed, yes, for the power outage, yes, for the ruined party, but mostly for how she froze when Uncle Rick toasted me like I was a punchline. She said she saw my face, the way I looked at her, and she hated the version of herself who smiled and sipped her drink. I didn't know what to say. She wrote, and I was too scared to say the right thing. It wasn't an apology. Not really, but it wasn't nothing either. She said she hadn't realized just how much of the load I'd been carrying until I put it down. And, she asked, if not forgiveness, then space to try again. It hit me harder than I expected, because I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe there was a version of Mom who would stand up, even if it meant disrupting the family illusion. But I also remembered years of birthdays where I was barely acknowledged, Christmases where I was expected to fund the gifts but not join the laughter. Was a letter enough to erase all that? No, but maybe it was enough to reopen the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over conversations in my head, things I wish I had said that night, lines that would have landed better than silence. But maybe the silence was the statement. Maybe walking out had said more than 1,000 speeches ever could. I hadn't blocked Charlotte or the others, but I no longer responded. Not out of spite, but because I was learning to listen to the version of me that didn't shrink to fit their comfort. The version who was finally starting to ask, what do I need? A week later, I got a text from Mom. Would you meet me for coffee? Just to talk. No pressure. I stared at it for a long time. There was part of me that wanted to ignore it. That said, she had her chance. But another part, the tired, human part, whispered, maybe this is her trying. And even if it wasn't perfect, maybe trying was enough to sit down and talk. We met at a cafe near her neighborhood, the kind with too many plants and overpriced scones. She looked older than I remembered. Not tired, just worn. We didn't hug. We didn't do small talk. We sat. We sipped. And finally, she spoke. She admitted to staying silent for years, not just at the party, but always. It was easier to let you handle it. She said, you were capable, and I didn't want to fight the others. Her voice trembled. But I see now that made me complicit. It was the first time I'd heard her say that word. Complicit. Not innocent, not unaware. Complicit. I told her I didn't need an apology. I needed her to stop pretending like silence wasn't a choice, like neutrality wasn't just another shade of betrayal. She nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just nodded. And in that quiet, I felt something shift. Not a healing, not yet, but a loosening, a softening around the hard edges. She asked if we could keep talking, if we could rebuild something, just the two of us. I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no either. I left the cafe feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks possibility. But while my relationship with Mom cracked open, the rest of the family dug in. Charlotte messaged me the next day not to apologize, but to say, it's good you and Mom are talking again. Maybe you'll come around to the rest of us soon. I didn't reply, because I knew what that meant. Come around. Translate, go back. Shrink. Soften. Pay. And I wasn't going back. Not ever again. But I had no idea just how far they were willing to go to pull me back in, or what they would do when I stayed gone. After the meeting with Mom, I started rebuilding my life quietly. I didn't attend family brunches. I didn't answer cryptic invitations wrapped in guilt. I didn't send money for birthdays or step in when someone's car got repossessed. And one by one, the people who once called me reliable rebranded me as selfish. Charlotte, of course, didn't let things lie. She began posting subtweets, passive-aggressive lines like, some people love playing the victim and family is a two-way street. Unless you block it. Her circle knew exactly who she meant. It didn't hurt. Not really. But it reminded me that silence wasn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's weaponized. Then came the real blow. Cousin Jenna messaged me one morning. Hey, just giving you a heads up. Aunt Emily's been asking questions about the envelope, about the night of the party. Charlotte's saying you staged the whole thing, that you never planned to pay. I stared at the screen. Jenna added. I don't believe her. But you should know some people do. I didn't respond right away. I needed air. I went for a walk around the block, letting my breath settle. This wasn't just gossip. This was character assassination. Quiet, calculated, deliberate. And there was something about it, something off. So I did what I always do when I feel the world sliding sideways. I investigated. I called the venue again. Spoke to the same woman from before. She remembered me. I asked if anyone from my family had come by to retrieve the envelope in the days after the party. She hesitated, then said, Actually, a woman named Emily stopped by a week later. Claimed she was your aunt. Something clicked. Aunt Emily and I had never been close. She was Mom's younger sister. Quiet. Always in the background at family events. Never cruel, but never vocal. The kind of person who'd watch a fight from the hallway and later say, I didn't want to get involved. And now she was involved. I messaged Jenna. Did your mom mention the envelope? She replied, No. Why? Because I knew Emily. She didn't move unless someone told her to, and I could feel Charlotte's fingerprints all over this. She wasn't content with isolation. She wanted a narrative, one where I was the antagonist, one that justified their rejection of me. But here's the thing about lies. They need help to survive. And someone had slipped up. 2 days later, I got an email from Emily. Not a call, not a message, an email. Subject, something you should know. She wrote that she had been asked by Charlotte to retrieve the envelope from the venue. I was told you had left it there as a ploy to save face, that it was part of a tantrum. But when I picked it up and saw the amount you'd written on the check, I realized I'd been lied to. $8, $400. That was what I'd covered. The venue, the catering, the flowers, all of it. Emily admitted she hadn't told anyone. I didn't know who to believe. I didn't want to be dragged into the drama. But silence, again, is never neutral. She ended the message with one line, I'm sorry, I didn't know how deep this went. I didn't respond. Not right away. Because what do you say to someone who watched you get torn down and said nothing? Who held the evidence in her hands and chose stillness over justice? But the gears in my mind had already turned. If Charlotte had orchestrated this, turned the story against me, lied about the envelope, manipulated even Emily, what else had she said? What else had she twisted? I called Mom. Told her everything. She went quiet for a long time, then, in a voice I barely recognized, she said, She told me you refused to pay, that you were trying to make a point. And you believed her. There was a pause, a long one. I didn't want to, she said. But Charlotte, she sounded so certain. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. I had been erased with confidence, undone by someone else's certainty. I ended the call before it turned into something ugly, because I felt something building inside me, a low, steady burn that had nowhere to go. But I knew now silence wasn't enough. I had told myself I didn't want revenge, that walking away was enough. But walking away only works when the past doesn't chase you. And Charlotte. She was building a whole new version of me behind my back. One people were starting to believe. I needed to make it stop. Not with screaming, not with confrontation, but with facts, receipts, and the truth. So I gathered everything: bank statements, emails, the original invoice, the scanned copy of the check. I created a shared Google Drive folder and titled it For the Record. I didn't write an explanation. I didn't editorialize. I sent the link to every member of the family, including Charlotte. And then I waited. 6 hours later, my phone rang. It was Charlotte. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. I can't believe you'd do this. Why are you trying to ruin me? This is so manipulative. Rachel, you're turning everyone against me. I stared at the messages. And finally, I replied, "All I did was tell the truth. If that ruins you, maybe ask why." She didn't respond, but others did. Uncle Rick, the same man who toasted my invisibility, sent a half-hearted apology. "Didn't realize you covered everything." That was generous. Generous. As if generosity was the issue. Cousin Lily messaged, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I just went along with what everyone said." Jenna sent one line, "I'm proud of you." But none of those messages changed what mattered. The lie had already circulated. My reputation had already been bruised. But for the first time, they were the ones scrambling. And I felt calm. But the storm wasn't over yet. Because there was one person who hadn't responded at all. Mom. And that silence, that one hurt most of all. After I sent the proof, the payment confirmation, the invoice, the check copy to every single family member through that simple folder titled "For the Record," I felt a strange calmness. I didn't include a message, no angry caption or bitter commentary, just the truth. Neat, documented, unapologetic. 6 hours of silence followed. And then Charlotte cracked. The first text came in all caps, "Unbelievable." Then another, "You're airing family business to make me look bad." Then the guilt-colored one, "You've always hated me. Admit it. This was about humiliation, not justice." I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. The panic in her tone said more than I ever could. Charlotte wasn't angry because I lied. She was furious because I hadn't. Her power lived in the shadows, whispers, half-truths, unchallenged stories. My documentation was a spotlight, and she was burning under it. Finally, I responded with one line, "The truth doesn't humiliate honest people." I didn't expect her to reply, and she didn't. But I could feel the ripple spreading. Within hours, I got messages from people who had ghosted me since the birthday debacle. Uncle Rick, who once toasted to my useless generosity, now sent a 2-sentence apology. "Didn't know the full story. Appreciate all you've done." Appreciate as if this was about gratitude. It wasn't. It was about being believed. Cousin Lily sent a longer message. "Honestly, I just went along with what everyone else said. I didn't question it. I'm sorry. Rachel, you didn't deserve that." She meant well, I think, but it hurt to read, because her silence had participated too. The most sincere came from Jenna. "This was long overdue. You stood up for yourself without turning into them. That's rare." And from her. It meant something. She'd always been the quiet observer, the one person in that circle who understood nuance without needing to be told where to look. But one name stayed missing from my inbox. Mom. No text, no call, no email. At first, I convinced myself she was processing. That maybe, just maybe, she was trying to figure out how to reach out and fix it without taking sides. But deep down, I knew better. Silence was a choice. And by not reaching out, she was speaking volumes. Still, I held out longer than I should have. 3 days, then 4, then a full week. Every morning I checked my phone with this flicker of hope that maybe she had messaged while I slept. And every morning I was met with the same blank screen. And slowly, that hope calcified into something colder. I finally called her, just once, straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. 2 days later, Jenna reached out again. This time, she asked if I'd seen Charlotte's recent post. "You should look." She wrote, "It's a lot." I braced myself and opened the link. There, on Facebook, was a long, publicly shared post from Charlotte, painting herself as the victim of family betrayal, of deliberate attempts to ruin a celebration out of resentment. She never named me directly, but everyone knew. Comments poured in. So sorry you're dealing with this. You deserve better. Haters will always hate. It was surreal. She'd taken my silence and rebuilt it into a weapon pointed back at me. The truth had not only been buried again, it had been twisted into a story of her own heartbreak. And the likes were climbing. 70, then 83, then over 100, some from family members who had received the proof. And that's when I realized truth alone isn't always enough. Not when people are addicted to the story they've told themselves. Not when your refusal to play their game gets rebranded as cruelty. That night, I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone. I thought about posting a public reply, sharing the same documents online, clearing my name again. But something in me said no. That's her arena, her rules, her war of perception. And I was done fighting battles on borrowed ground. Instead, I did something else. I called a lawyer. It wasn't about suing anyone, not yet, but I needed to understand my rights. Because Charlotte had started whispering rumors that I'd embezzled funds, that I'd lied about the invoice amounts, that maybe I'd pocketed some of the money from Mom's birthday. It was petty, yes, but libel spreads like fire when no one checks for smoke. The lawyer listened carefully, advised me to keep all documentation, screenshots, messages, dates. He told me that while it may never reach court, being prepared was better than being blindsided, and that simple advice, that idea of protecting my peace like it had legal value, felt like oxygen. I left his office not with a lawsuit in motion, but with something better: clarity. This wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about making sure no one ever got to rewrite my truth again. Later that week, I got an invitation hand-delivered in a thick white envelope with silver-embossed letters. Charlotte was hosting a reconciliation dinner. For family only. No plus ones, no outsiders. No mention of me by name. But the invitation came to me anyway. A trap, thinly disguised as peace. I read it twice, then tossed it into the recycling bin. I wouldn't show up to another stage where I was expected to play the villain so she could look like the peacemaker. But I did make a decision. It was time to reclaim not just the truth, but the narrative. I would stop defending myself reactively. I would go on offense with precision, with control, and with undeniable power. Because the only thing that terrifies manipulators more than confrontation is exposure. And what I uncovered next changed everything. After declining Charlotte's invitation to the so-called reconciliation dinner, I expected fallout, but what followed wasn't a fallout. It was a storm of cold calculation, disguised as concern. She messaged me the day before the event with a cheery tone. Still hoping you'll swing by. It's important we show the family we can move past things. No acknowledgement of her lies. No reference to the campaign she'd waged against me. Just a saccharine plea wrapped in optics. I ignored it. The next day, photos appeared online. Charlotte, flanked by our mother and Aunt Emily, all wearing pastel smiles and matching floral dresses. The caption read, "Because no matter what, family finds its way back together." It was a direct shot. I wasn't just missing, I was being painted as the reason unity had been delayed. But I wasn't hurt. I was done being hurt. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a pot of coffee, and a folder labeled Project Monroe. And for the first time in my life, I did something not for their comfort, not for their benefit, but for my freedom. I began documenting everything, not just finances, patterns, emails, text messages. Years of manipulation boiled down into evidence. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about truth, controlled, archived, prepared. I wasn't going to scream into a void again. I was going to build a foundation so solid no one could twist it this time. That's when I reached out to two people I hadn't spoken to in years, Alexis and Marcus, former family friends. Alexis had once been close with Charlotte, until Charlotte ghosted her after borrowing money and never repaying it. Marcus had dated Jenna for a while and had witnessed the Monroe family's two-faced nature firsthand. I told them what had been happening, carefully, without embellishment. Alexis didn't hesitate. "I believe every word," she said. "She did the same thing to me." Marcus laughed. "You're the last domino. She picked you off because you're the one that made her look small." They both agreed to write down their stories. I didn't ask them to go public. I just wanted to collect testimonies, create a timeline, establish a pattern. It was like preparing a case for court, even if I never filed anything, because the power wasn't in confrontation, it was in knowledge, strategy, structure. But just when I thought I had the upper hand, a knock came at my door. It was Mom. No warning, no message ahead of time. Just her, standing in my hallway, holding a small tray of lemon bars like this with some sitcom apology. I opened the door, didn't invite her in, just waited. She cleared her throat. "I've been thinking about everything." I crossed my arms. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quickly. I realized I was silent for too long. And Charlotte, she told me you were unstable, that you needed space. I believed her. I let her narrate you. It was strange. I wanted to yell, to demand why she never questioned anything. But instead, I felt tired, not sad, not angry, yet just depleted. "I never wanted to choose sides," she added. "You did," I said, "by not speaking up. You did." She winced. "I know. I just didn't want to lose her. Or you." "But you lost me anyway," I said, voice flat. We stood in silence for a moment before she asked softly, "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then opened the door just enough for her to step inside. She looked around like she was entering a stranger's home. And maybe she was. I was no longer the daughter she remembered, quiet, compliant, always fixing things. We sat. She pushed the lemon bars toward me. I didn't touch them. "I want to make things right," she said. "Then start by telling the truth." I replied, "To everyone, about what really happened." She flinched. "That will tear the family apart." "No," I corrected her, "it'll stop the rot." She left shortly after. No promises made, just an awkward hug and a whispered, "You deserve better than this." I watched her walk away, not sure if I'd ever see her again. But the next morning, I got an email. From her. Subject line, "If I don't say it, who will?" Attached was a single-page PDF. A signed letter, typed, and painfully honest. She admitted I had paid for the party, that Charlotte had lied, that the narrative circulating wasn't just untrue, it was deliberately constructed to isolate me. I read it 3 times. Then added it to my folder, because I knew what had to happen next. I set a date, not a family dinner, not an intervention, a controlled meeting, neutral location, limited attendees, and one agenda: truth. I called it the reset. I invited Mom, Jenna, Aunt Emily, a few cousins, no Charlotte, not yet. I rented a small conference room in a local hotel, neutral, unadorned, serious. When everyone arrived, I handed out a printed version of the folder timelines, evidence, screenshots, testimony, and then I spoke. Calm, clear, no theatrics. "I'm not here to make you pick sides. I'm here so you understand what actually happened, and if, after this, you still choose to believe Charlotte's version, that's on you, but at least you'll be doing it with all the facts." Silence followed. Jenna read every word. Emily blinked rapidly, processing. Mom sat still, eyes locked on the floor. Then Jenna spoke first. "You're not crazy. You never were." Emily nodded, barely audible. She played us. But Mom said nothing. And, as the meeting ended, she simply walked out, leaving her copy behind. Later that night, I got a message from Charlotte. One line, "You've declared war." I stared at the screen. No, I thought, this isn't war. This is withdrawal. And if you think it's a war just because I stopped bleeding for you, then maybe you were the one holding the knife all along. But I didn't send that. Not yet. Because the end wasn't written. Not until she answered for everything. Story 2. My name is Natalie Harris, and for 5 years, I gave everything I had to a company that never intended to give anything back. It wasn't glamorous, just a mid-sized digital agency in Atlanta, the kind of place where you punch in, grind hard, and if you're lucky, maybe climb the ladder a few rungs. I started fresh out of college as a digital marketing specialist, young, hungry, eager to prove I wasn't just another replaceable analyst. Back then, the team was small, the pace was brutal, but it felt like we were building something real. Carrie Monroe, the marketing director, was tough but polished. She liked clean numbers and sharper people. At first, I admired her composure, the way she owned every meeting. I thought she'd be the kind of mentor that sharpens you. For the first 2 years, I stayed late without being asked, trained new hires without complaint, delivered campaign results that broke records. I was the yes person, always ready, always reliable. But that started to change around my 3rd year. I wasn't naive anymore. I'd seen people with less experience get better titles. I'd watched a 23-year-old male hire walk in with a higher salary than mine, something I only discovered when he accidentally forwarded me his offer letter while asking me to onboard him. My stomach dropped that day, not from jealousy, but from clarity. I had been loyal, and they had been opportunistic. That's when I mustered the courage to formally request a raise. I came prepared with metrics, performance reports, benchmarks from industry databases. Carrie gave me that PR smile and said, "The company's just not in a position to offer raises right now. Maybe next quarter." I swallowed that line 3 more times over the next 2 years. Eventually, I stopped believing in quarters. I stopped believing in their maybe, but I didn't stop performing. My campaigns still exceeded targets. I led initiatives without being asked. My email was the first to respond, the last to sign off. But something hardened in me, a quiet bitterness, the kind that simmers below your ribs. I started to job hunt discreetly. I wasn't trying to be dramatic, just realistic. I didn't even think of it as betrayal. I saw it as survival. And when I finally found a new opportunity remote, 30% more pay, actual PTO, and a woman-led team that respected talent, I felt something unfamiliar: relief. Not joy, just a release, like I'd been holding my breath for years. What I didn't expect was to get caught before I could leave on my terms. The company was doing routine software audits, and Carrie's nephew, Ethan, who worked in IT, saw a recruiter's message pop up on my screen during a remote troubleshooting call. Hours later, I was summoned. Carrie's office was cold, always too much air conditioning and not enough warmth. She didn't waste time. "So, you've been job hunting," she said flatly, like it was a sin. I didn't deny it. "Yes, I have." She stood, hands clasped in front of her, like she was praying for the perfect takedown line. "If you're not committed to this team, then you're no longer needed here." Just like that, 5 years gone. Security was called. I was walked out. No severance, no farewell, just a hollow space where my dignity used to sit. I remember sitting in my car, parked beneath the flickering fluorescent lot lights, stunned, not angry yet, just empty. I stared at the steering wheel, phone in hand, mind spinning. That job had been my whole world. It had shaped my routine, my self-worth, my sense of identity, and now it was gone. But then my phone buzzed. My new employer was calling. "Hi, Natalie. Just confirming we're thrilled to have you starting next week." I exhaled. Finally, I'm in, I replied. And in that moment, the fog began to lift. Carrie thought she'd blindsided me. What she didn't know was that I'd spent years documenting everything. And what was coming next? She would never see it coming. By the time I left the parking lot that day, something inside me had shifted. The initial numbness was gone, replaced by a dull, burning clarity. For 5 years, I had been the ideal employee, disciplined, productive, respectful, and in return, I was discarded without warning. But unlike so many others, I had not left empty-handed. I had receipts, literal, digital, undeniable receipts, emails that thanked me for saving accounts that were on the brink, Slack threads where I was promised follow-up on raise discussions that never came, project summaries I'd written that showed exactly how much revenue my campaigns had pulled in, and a spreadsheet, updated quietly for months, tracking overtime hours that were never compensated. That spreadsheet was my slow rebellion, my passive resistance against being invisible. I drove home in silence, my mind already working like an engine. I wasn't going to send angry texts. I wasn't going to post vague tweets. I wasn't going to waste energy trying to shame Carrie in public. I was going to be surgical, precise, strategic. Because if she thought she could throw me out and walk away untouched, she hadn't been paying attention to the kind of woman I'd become. The first call I made was to Samantha Lee, a former coworker from the legal department. We'd worked together closely on a client case 2 years ago, and while we didn't talk often, I always respected her honesty. She picked up after the second ring. "Natalie," she said, surprise in her voice. "Hey, Sam, I need help," I replied. No preamble, just fact. And without hesitation, she answered, "What happened?" I laid it all out. The raise promises that never materialized, the unpaid overtime hours, the new hires making more money, the retaliatory termination. Sam listened without interrupting, but I could hear her typing in the background. "Did you keep written records?" she asked. "Everything," I said. "I kept everything." There was a beat of silence. Then she said, "Good. You may have a wrongful termination claim, and potentially a wage theft case. This isn't just shady, it's illegal. We'll need to talk to someone who specializes in labor law. But you've already done half the work." For the first time in days, I felt control return to my body, like I was no longer drowning in someone else's current. Over the next 2 days, we built the foundation of a case. Sam reached out to a labor rights attorney she trusted. I gathered and sorted files, labeling each by date, by manager, by violation. I also began drafting a resignation email, not out of spite, but for the record. Even though I'd been fired, I wanted a paper trail, a statement that would outline everything they'd tried to brush under the rug. My email was professional, but direct. While I recognize the company's right to make staffing decisions, I believe my termination following evidence of outside job inquiries after years of unpaid labor and unmet compensation discussions reflects retaliatory intent rather than standard policy. I have retained legal counsel. I didn't expect a response, but within the hour, Carrie replied, "It was short, almost laughably so. You should have been grateful. We gave you a chance. I don't tolerate disloyalty." Her arrogance was intact, and that was exactly what I needed, because her message didn't just reek of ego, it confirmed everything we'd suspected. This wasn't about policy, it was personal. Carrie ran her department like a monarchy, not a workplace. Her pride had been wounded, and she lashed out. But what she didn't realize was that she hadn't silenced me. She'd activated me, that same night. I reached out to 3 former coworkers I trusted. I didn't tell them everything, just that I was building a timeline of events related to raises and promotions. I asked, gently, if they'd ever felt overlooked or undervalued. Every single one said yes. Some had more screenshots, performance reviews that led nowhere, bonus agreements never fulfilled. The cracks were beginning to show. And then the message that shifted everything. "Hey Nat, my old teammate June messaged. I still have emails from the time Carrie refused to approve my overtime, but made me stay through a campaign launch. I didn't know if it mattered back then. But if you're doing something, I want in." I stared at the screen for a long time, heart thudding. It wasn't just my story anymore. This was bigger. Carrie hadn't just mishandled one employee. She'd built her power by keeping others silent, compliant, exhausted, and for the first time, the silence was starting to fracture. And what comes after fractures is collapse. The week that followed was a blur of strategy and quiet revelations. I wasn't sleeping well, but I wasn't tired either, more like fueled by a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Every moment I spent digging through old files or reading testimonies from former colleagues reminded me that I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't imagined the favoritism, the dismissal, the casual cruelty disguised as professionalism, and most importantly, I hadn't been alone. Each message from people like June, Elena, or Rashad added weight to the narrative. Carrie's pattern wasn't just anecdotal, it was systemic, and I wasn't the only casualty. Samantha connected me with Julia Klein, a labor attorney based out of Washington, D.C. She specialized in workplace retaliation and wage theft cases. And from our first phone call, I knew she was the real deal. She didn't flinch when I described the unpaid overtime or Carrie's thinly veiled threats. She just asked, "Do you have timestamps, communications, performance data?" I said. "Yes, everything's documented." Her tone sharpened. "Then we go forward, and we go hard." That was the moment it stopped being just about justice. It became about momentum. We weren't just looking to file a claim, we were preparing to expose an entire structure built on silence and intimidation. Word traveled fast, but quietly. Former coworkers who had ghosted me months ago were now reaching out in cautious solidarity. One night, I received a LinkedIn message from Alan, a former senior analyst who'd left the company a year before. "I heard what's happening," he wrote. "Carrie pushed me out too. I just never had the energy to fight. If you need a statement, I'm ready." His tone was subdued, but firm. It struck me how many of us had simply swallowed our pain to survive. How many talented people had walked away, convinced their stories wouldn't matter. But now, those same people were rising like a tide. Then came the break I hadn't anticipated. A whistleblower within the company. An anonymous message hit my inbox through Proton Mail. The sender claimed to still work in admin and had access to internal payroll data. They'd been watching the chaos unfold from the inside and had grown tired of HR's excuses. Attached was a document showing clear discrepancies between hours logged by employees and what had been reported on official records. I forwarded everything to Julia. She called me 20 minutes later. "This is gold. This shows deliberate underreporting. We're not just talking about wrongful termination anymore. We're talking about coordinated wage theft on a broad scale." I stared at my laptop, hands cold, heart hammering. Part of me had feared that maybe my anger had exaggerated things, that maybe I'd read too much into the culture. But this was proof, and with it came something else I hadn't expected: press interest. A freelance reporter from a regional business journal reached out to me after someone in our growing network passed along my story. Her name was Liana Tran. And she wasn't just looking for a headline, she wanted the truth. We spoke for hours. I gave her timelines, documents, contacts. She interviewed others too: June, Alan, even Samantha off the record. By the time she was done, she had more than enough to write a compelling piece. The article dropped on a Monday. Toxic leadership and wage suppression. Inside a marketing firm in crisis. It didn't name Carrie in the headline, but inside the story, her fingerprints were everywhere. It outlined the termination culture, the inconsistencies in payroll, and the retaliation tactics that had pushed high-performing employees out the door. I didn't post it. I didn't share it. But it didn't matter. People found it. By noon, my phone was buzzing with messages from current staff. Did you see this? Thank you for saying what we couldn't. Carrie's in a panic. Emergency meeting called. And just like that, the control she had held so tightly began to slip. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of her reckoning. By the time the article made its rounds, the office that once felt like a tightly controlled machine started creaking at its hinges. Carrie, who had thrived in whispers and invisible fear, suddenly found herself in the spotlight, dragged there not by scandalous rumor, but by proof, by documentation, by voices that once trembled but now spoke with clarity. I didn't dance on the ashes. I simply observed. One of the current interns, Anna, whom I'd barely known, DM'd me on Instagram. People are actually talking in meetings now. It's like the spell broke. HR is scrambling. Carrie looks like she hasn't slept in days. I read her message 3 times. Heart thudding, not out of glee, but out of something deeper. Vindication. Maybe. Relief. Definitely. But also a strange grief. For what could have been. For the years lost to loyalty that was never reciprocated. Then came the formal shift. Carrie was placed on an indefinite administrative leave. The official email that went out to staff was as sanitized as expected, talking about leadership transitions and restructuring opportunities. But I knew better, and so did everyone else. Within 48 hours, 2 more resignations followed Kyle, an associate VP who had co-signed Carrie's rejection of my raise 3 years ago, and Melissa, the HR director who'd once told a colleague to just be patient when their medical leave paperwork had gone missing. Each departure was announced with hollow platitudes. Each one made the truth harder to deny. But the most unexpected message came from June. She texted me on a Thursday morning. I just gave my full statement to legal, including emails. I was scared, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore. That hit different, because June had always been the quiet one, the peacekeeper. Watching her cross that line wasn't just satisfying. It meant we weren't just burning something down. We were rebuilding something better. Together, I thanked her, simply. And she responded with a line I'll never forget. You gave us permission to stop surviving and start fighting. Outside the chaos, my new job had become a strange source of stability. Ironically, while one part of my life crumbled, the other blossomed. My new manager, Tanya, was everything Carrie wasn't: collaborative, curious, unthreatened by feedback. I wasn't treated like a threat for knowing things. I was appreciated for it. One day, Tanya pulled me aside and said, I know you're still carrying baggage from your last role, but here, we value balance and boundaries. You don't need to prove your worth every day just to feel safe. I almost cried, not because it was emotional, but because it felt so foreign to be seen like that, trusted. It reminded me that the way Carrie treated me wasn't the norm. It was abuse masquerading as leadership. And then, just when I thought things were settling, I got an email from Carrie. The subject line, disappointed. My pulse spiked as I opened it. Not with fear, but curiosity. It read, I'm disappointed you chose to air company business publicly. You've damaged reputations and relationships. I hope it was worth it. That was it. 4 sentences that dripped with control, even when she no longer had any. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, I replied, I gave you 5 years. You gave me manipulation, broken promises, and silence. What I did wasn't personal, it was necessary. And yes, it was absolutely worth it. I never heard back. Still, The aftermath rippled on. The company quietly settled with me. The payout wasn't massive, but symbolic and admission they couldn't argue with the evidence. More importantly, Carrie's name vanished from the company directory. The last piece of her reign deleted not with ceremony, but with a quiet click. A leadership reshuffling email followed, but it read like a cover-up. No one was fooled. But what stayed with me most wasn't the money, or the articles, or even the silent apologies from those who had once looked away. It was the feeling of choosing myself for once, fully and unapologetically. That knowledge, sharp and quiet, was more powerful than any headline. And just when I thought I could finally breathe, one last surprise came knocking. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind that slips by unnoticed, if not for the hum of the coffee machine and the dog curling up at your feet. I was halfway through folding laundry when I heard a knock, sharp, deliberate, unfamiliar. Not the usual drop-off thud of a delivery driver or the neighbor's absent-minded tap. No, this one carried intention. I froze, instinctively glancing toward the door like it might disappear if I looked long enough. Amanda, my partner, peeked out from the kitchen, brow raised, silent question hanging between us. I walked slowly, heart oddly steady despite the unknown, and opened the door. There stood Mariah Foster, the quiet girl from payroll who'd transferred out 2 years ago. She looked different, older maybe, not in a tired way, but in a knowing one. She held a folder, thick and slightly crumpled, and in her eyes was something between anxiety and defiance. "Hey," she said, voice almost shy. "Can I come in for a minute?" I hesitated, not out of mistrust, but surprise. I hadn't seen her since the early days of the internal HR fallout after Carrie's exposure. Back then, she'd been a whisper, one of many who disappeared when the cracks first started showing. We sat on the couch, the dog watching curiously from the hallway. She didn't touch her coffee. I saw everything unfold. She began, hands fidgeting in her lap. "And I owe you an apology. Back when you tried to escalate the pay discrepancies with HR, I was the one who flagged the reports, the overtime logs. Carrie made me adjust them." Her voice wavered. She said it was for compliance, that she'd explain later, but I knew it wasn't right. I said nothing. I let her talk, not because I wasn't angry, but because she needed to get it out. And deep down, I knew this wasn't a confession born out of guilt alone. It was something else, redemption. Maybe. Mariah opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets, timestamp logs, emails, everything I remembered trying to get access to during my claim. "I kept copies," she said, meeting my gaze. I didn't know if I'd ever need them. But after the article, I couldn't keep pretending. There it was, evidence that could turn an already won battle into a systemic reckoning. The depth of Carrie's manipulation wasn't just personal, it was structural. Mariah's documents could validate claims from multiple departments, affecting dozens of employees. "You can do what you want with these," she said quietly, "but I'd like to help, testify, if needed." I nodded slowly, pulse thudding in my ears, not because I needed more proof, but because the truth had legs. Now voices that once trembled were rising, and that meant something bigger was forming. Amanda sat down beside me, placing a warm hand on my back. "What are you going to do?" she asked gently. "I'm going to finish what we started," I said, picking up the folder. Because revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's patient, precise, a slow unraveling of everything built on silence. And now that the silence was broken, there was no going back. But as I looked at Mariah, a thought flickered, one last question that hadn't left me since the day I was fired. How many others were still out there, living under the weight of someone else's silence? Story 3. My name is Rachel Monroe, I'm 29 years old, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person to cut her own mother out of her life. I used to believe in second chances, in time softening the sharp edges of people we love, even when they've spent years slicing us open with them. I was raised on excuses. That's just how she is. She means well. You're too sensitive. I absorbed those phrases like commandments, repeating them every time she crossed a line, every time she disguised cruelty as concern, judgment as love. But nothing prepared me for the moment she looked into my baby's face and recoiled like she'd seen something hideous. It was Ava's first birthday, a day I had poured every drop of my hope and healing into. After 3 miscarriages, 2 failed IVF cycles, and a storm of self-doubt, Ava came into the world as my miracle, my anchor, my proof that life could still surprise me with grace. That night in the hospital, cradling her tiny body against mine, I whispered through exhausted tears, "You're everything." So when her birthday came around, I wanted magic, a backyard filled with pastel balloons, fairy lights glowing like fireflies, a custom cake shaped like a storybook cottage. I invited only those who had stood by us in the trenches: my husband Ethan, my best friend Megan, a few relatives, and, despite everything, my mother. I wasn't naive. I didn't expect hugs and butterflies. But I hoped, foolishly, that she might show up softened by age or touched by the gravity of the day. For the first hour, she kept to herself, sipping champagne and making small talk. But then came the photo moment. I had Ava on my hip. We were all gathered around the cake. Someone had just said smile, and my mother leaned in, her voice coated in that familiar, syrupy venom. "God, she looks just like your father's side. Poor thing. Let's hope she grows into her face." The air left my lungs. My hands stiffened around Ava's waist. The laughter died. Megan whispered, "Jesus," while Ethan's jaw visibly clenched. I turned to my mother and said 2 words I had never said, with real weight before. "Get out." She blinked, chuckled, thought I was joking. "Come on," she said, waving a hand. "Don't be dramatic. It's family teasing." But something had snapped, not cracked, snapped. "Leave," I said again, louder. "You don't get to insult my child and stay." Silence followed her huffing exit, the slam of the gate punctuating a wound long festering. That night, as I sat alone in the living room after cleaning up, I scrolled through the birthday photos and began erasing her from each one. Not cropping, erasing. I used editing software, brushed her out pixel by pixel until the album felt safe, sacred, like it belonged to Ava and no one who had sneered at her. A few days later, my mother took to Facebook, painting herself as the wounded matriarch whose daughter had turned cruel over a misunderstood joke. The comments flooded in, people asking what happened, lamenting the loss of values, telling me how they'd never abandon their mother. My inbox lit up like wildfire. Aunt Diane begging for peace, my cousin Tori trying to play peacemaker, and then Matt, my older brother, the one who missed birthdays and baby showers but suddenly cared deeply about family unity, calling me vindictive for editing her out of the pictures. "That's her granddaughter," he said. "She has a right to be remembered." I waited until he finished, then asked, "Do you really think I'm going to frame the moment someone insulted my baby to her face and call it a keepsake?" He hung up. But the guilt campaign had only begun, and I was just getting started. Within 48 hours of her Facebook monologue, I was being digitally ambushed. Comments ranged from, "We all make mistakes," to, "You'll regret pushing your family away." Some even veered into pure manipulation. "You only get one mother," as if biology entitled her to unconditional access to my child. And yet, not a single message acknowledged what she had said. Not one. The conversation wasn't about Ava. It was about my mother's feelings, her pride, her image. It was as if my child had become a prop in someone else's drama. Still, I stayed quiet publicly, privately, though. I began rewriting everything: boundaries, roles, expectations. I reminded myself daily, this isn't about a birthday party. This is about years of dismissive comments disguised as parenting. When I was 13 and cried because a boy at school called me weird, she said, "Well, maybe if you didn't talk so much, they'd like you more." When I missed school with a stomach virus at 16, she called me lazy and said, "You don't see me staying home when I have cramps." She had belittled my choice of college, mocked my husband's quiet kindness, rolled her eyes every time I enforced screen time limits for Ava. It was relentless, and for so long. I accepted it as normal. But now, for the first time, I had clarity. My daughter would not grow up thinking love feels like walking on eggshells. My husband, Ethan, bless him, had stayed largely silent during the backlash. He wasn't one for family politics, but he knew pain when he saw it. One night, as we folded laundry, tiny socks and pastel onesies, he looked at me and said, "I've never been more proud of you." That sentence undid me. I buried my face into a folded burp cloth and cried, not from sadness, but from release. It was the first time I didn't feel alone in my decision. 3 days later, I posted a simple, calm message on my Facebook. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are protection. My daughter deserves a peaceful home. If you believe that includes tolerating toxic behavior, that's your choice, but it's not mine. It wasn't explosive. It didn't name names, but it landed like a bomb. Some people unfollowed me. Others sent quiet messages of support. A few surprised me old friends from college. Even a second cousin I barely knew, saying they'd had similar experiences with their parents and were glad someone finally said it out loud. For a moment, there was peace. My house felt calmer, my sleep deeper. But I should have known. Peace, with my mother, never lasts long. One rainy Thursday morning, she showed up on my doorstep with a perfectly folded tissue peeking out of her sleeve and a polka dot gift bag clenched in her trembling hand. She wore just enough mascara to create drama when it smudged. Theatrical, but strategic. "I just want to see my granddaughter," she said, voice quivering like she was reading from a soap opera script. "Please, don't let her grow up hating me." Behind me, Ava gurgled happily from her playpen, totally unaware of the emotional storm brewing at the door. I stepped outside, closing the door gently behind me, separating my daughter from the toxicity still trying to claw its way in. "Mom," I said slowly, "you're not the victim here." She blinked, clearly thrown off by my calm. "I never said I was. But you overreacted. Ava's a baby. She didn't understand." "She will, one day," I said, sharper now. "And what then? When she's 5, 10, you think this stuff magically stops, that you won't say something cruel and expect everyone to laugh it off again." She tried to push the gift bag into my hands. "It's just a little bunny and a sweater. I thought maybe we could talk." But I didn't take it. I didn't even look inside. Talking isn't the issue, Mom. Listening is. Owning your words is. You don't get to insult someone and then cry when they draw a boundary. You've spent your life acting like nothing ever sticks to you. Like if you say it with a smile, it doesn't hurt. Her lip trembled. She looked small, not weak, not harmless, just hollow. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I'm here. Aren't I?" "No," I said quietly. "You're here because people stopped taking your side on Facebook. You're not here to own what you did. You're here to get back in." She flinched, not enough to break character, but enough to let me know she felt the sting. "So what now?" she asked, stiffening. "You're going to keep her from me forever." I paused, heart pounding. Until you admit what you said was wrong and stop pretending it was a joke. Yes. Her face tightened. I don't know if I can do that. I figured, I replied, and gently closed the door. Behind the wood, I leaned my forehead against the cool surface, my breath catching. A minute later, I heard her car pull away. Ava had pulled off her socks again and was chewing one, grinning at me as I re-entered the room. I scooped her up, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You'll never think cruelty is normal, not on my watch." But I knew deep down it wasn't over. Not yet. It had been nearly 3 months of silence. No calls, no doorstep visits, no more public posts or guilt-laced messages disguised as family concern. It was as if my mother had finally understood, or at least accepted, that the door she'd tried to wedge open was now firmly closed. I was beginning to breathe again. Truly breathe. Our home had found a rhythm. Ava had started babbling in full sentences, her voice no longer shadowed by tension. My mornings didn't begin with a racing pulse or dread over what message might be waiting on my phone. For the first time in years, life felt clean. But peace, I've learned, is a quiet stage before the next act. It came in the form of a pale pink envelope, tucked carefully among the day's junk mail. My cousin Ellie's suite, diplomatic. Forever the peacemaker was getting married. The invite was hand-addressed, and inside was a handwritten note that said, "Please come. It wouldn't feel right without you. Drama-free zone. I promise." Ellie had always been kind to me, even when the rest of the family circled their wagons around my mother. She never commented on those Facebook posts, never sent a single guilt text, just quiet, respectful distance. I held the envelope for a long time before saying anything to Ethan. He was sitting on the floor, helping Ava build a shaky Lego tower, letting her knock it over just so she could giggle. "Ellie's getting married," I said. He looked up. "You going?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I want to. I miss her. But my mother will be there. She wouldn't miss a party. New audience, new dress. She thrives in rooms like that." He nodded slowly, then said the thing that cemented my decision. "You don't have to go, but if you do, you won't be going alone." So we went, all 3 of us. Ava wore a soft cream dress with a flower crown and pink shoes she kept kicking off. Ethan wore his best navy suit, the one that made his shoulders look broad and his presence calm. And I wore steel under my skin, masked by silk. The ceremony was lovely. Ellie glowed with happiness. Her fiancé beamed. The vows were simple and pure. And for a little while, I let myself drift into the version of family I used to hope was possible. A version where people loved you without sharpness, where you didn't have to armor yourself before walking into a room. We were seated at a table tucked near the corner of the reception hall, far from the dance floor but close enough to the buffet to feed Ava mashed potatoes and shredded chicken without disturbing anyone. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Until I felt it. That prickle on the back of my neck. That awareness you develop when you've lived under someone's shadow long enough to recognize their perfume before they enter a room. I turned and saw her. Mauve dress, champagne flute, surrounded by 2 of her sisters, the familiar co-conspirators who once laughed at my tears in childhood like it was a shared inside joke. Her eyes found mine. Her expression shifted surprise, calculation, then a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She excused herself from the circle and began walking toward us, the sway of her dress rehearsed, her mask perfectly affixed. Ethan stood immediately, subtly positioning himself between her and Ava. I stood too, matching her steps with silence. "Hi," she said, smiling like we were just 2 old friends catching up. "You look well." I nodded. We are. Her eyes flicked toward Ava, who was now distracted by a bread roll. Then back to me. I didn't know you were coming, she said casually, but I'm glad. Maybe we can talk. No, I said, my voice calm but final. This isn't the time or the place. I just want to hold my granddaughter. My spine stiffened. You don't get to hold her. Not until you acknowledge what you did. Not until you stop pretending it didn't happen. Her eyes narrowed. Not with anger, but with the slow realization that her usual tactics weren't working. You're really not going to let this go. I didn't blink. No, because I won't teach Ava that love means swallowing disrespect. She stared at me for a moment, and I could see the gears turning behind her controlled expression. I was no longer the girl desperate for approval. I was a mother protecting her child, and there was no leverage to be found here. I see, she finally said, flatly. Then she turned and walked away. Her heels clicked a little too fast. Her wine sloshed dangerously close to the rim of her flute. Her sisters pretended not to notice. Ellie found me later near the dance floor. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She had seen enough. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shrugged. I'm not. It needed to happen. She pulled me into a hug and murmured, You're a really good mom. I didn't cry then, but later, as Ethan drove us home, and Ava snored softly in her car seat, I stared at her in the rearview mirror, her cheeks rosy, her fists balled near her chin, like she was dreaming of castles or cupcakes, and I felt it. The weight of every decision, the cost of peace, and the unshakable truth that some doors are better left shut. But I also knew this wasn't the final chapter. Not yet. Weeks passed after Ellie's wedding, and for the first time in a long time, my world felt quiet. Not the kind of silence that follows an argument, the uneasy. Tense hush of things left unsaid, but a real, breathable calm. Ava was thriving. Her giggles filled the rooms of our home, and Ethan had a new lightness in his step. We had started doing little things again, morning walks with coffee, Sunday pancakes with extra whipped cream. I had stopped scanning my phone for messages that might derail my peace. The storm had passed, or so I thought. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I had just picked Ava up from daycare and was singing along to the radio while she hummed in the back seat. When I pulled into our driveway, something felt off. A single envelope was taped to our front door, the edges curling slightly in the wind. No name, no return address, just a thick, cream-colored card inside. And the moment I opened it, my chest tightened. Inside was a baby photo of me, less than a year old, held by my mother in a hospital bed, her smile radiant, her arms wrapped tight. On the back, she had written in careful, delicate script, You were everything I ever wanted too. Mom. I stood there, one hand gripping the doorframe for balance, not because I missed her or wanted to rush into her arms, but because for the first time, I saw it not an apology, not accountability, but grief. Her grief. Quiet, manipulative, and still centered around her pain, but real. It wasn't enough to undo what she'd done, not nearly, but it cracked something in me, something hard and ancient and heavy. Still, I didn't call, I didn't write, I didn't respond. Some truths come too late to save anything, and some wounds, when poked, just bleed again. 2 weeks later, Ethan surprised me with a weekend trip, just the three of us, a cabin near Lake Tahoe, surrounded by pines and stillness. We roasted marshmallows. Ava tried her first s'more and immediately smeared chocolate across her whole face like war paint. I laughed until I cried, one night, while she slept curled up between us. Ethan whispered, You know, you've changed. You're lighter. Like you're not carrying her anymore. I looked at him, the man who had stood beside me through every slammed door and stifled sob, and whispered back, maybe because I finally learned I don't have to. And I meant it. All of it. I didn't tell him about the photo. I didn't see the point. I had already made my decision that Ava would grow up knowing love didn't have to come with conditions. That family could be chosen. Boundaries could be sacred. And forgiveness didn't always mean access. I was done making room for people who only knew how to bruise. Months rolled on. Holidays came and went. We started our own traditions, hot cocoa and homemade ornaments. Backyard Easter egg hunts. 4th of July, sparklers in the cul-de-sac. My mother sent one more gift that winter, a tiny dress, wrapped in silver paper. Without a note. I donated it. I never opened another package after that. But the final chapter came quietly. As they often do. Ava was 3.5, chasing butterflies at the park while I sat on a bench watching her. When my phone buzzed, a text, a number I hadn't saved, but one I recognized instantly. I just wanted you to know. I'm moving to Arizona. I won't bother you anymore. I hope you're happy. No name, no apology, no closure, just a quiet exit, wrapped in self-pity. I stared at the screen for a moment before deleting it. Then I looked at Ava, twirling in her little yellow dress, sunlight catching in her hair. I smiled not because I had won, but because I had survived. That night, I wrote a letter, not to send, but to seal inside Ava's memory box. It read, "My sweet girl, one day you may wonder why your grandmother isn't in your photos, or at your birthdays. When you do, I'll tell you the truth, not out of bitterness, but so you'll understand that love is something you never have to beg for, that being kind doesn't mean letting people hurt you twice, that boundaries are not walls, but doors with locks, and you get to choose who has the key." I folded the letter, placed it next to the album from her first birthday, and closed the lid. No photos of my mother inside. No evidence of the cruelty disguised as tradition, just the truth, preserved with intention and love. As I turned out the light and walked to bed, I felt something unfamiliar, a kind of peace, not born from resolution, but from choice. The choice to protect my daughter from the pain I spent decades learning to navigate. The choice to be the mother I never had. And that night, for the first time since Ava was born, I slept without dreams. Years passed. As quietly and swiftly as the tide slips back into the sea, Ava grew, piece by piece, day by day, becoming someone entirely herself, curious, confident, with a laugh that burst like champagne bubbles, and a stubborn streak that mirrored mine in the best and worst ways. I never spoke badly of my mother around her, never colored her world with bitterness she hadn't earned. Instead, I taught Ava about kindness with boundaries, about empathy that doesn't erase accountability, and about choosing people who choose you back. There were times when questions brushed the edge of our conversations, like when Ava saw a photo of Ethan's parents and asked, "Where's your mommy, Mama?" The first time she asked, I felt my throat close for a second too long, but I smiled, and I answered honestly, "She's someone I don't see anymore, sweetheart," because sometimes, when people hurt us and can't stop, the best way to love ourselves is from far away. Ava had nodded in that way kids do, accepting the answer without needing more. At least, not yet. But I knew that wouldn't last forever, and I was ready for when the deeper questions would come. Life found its rhythm. Ethan and I flourished in ways I never thought possible. I started a small business designing curated memory books for families. Ironic as it was, my work was filled with strangers' joy birthdays, graduations, weddings, and I poured love into every layout. I healed, page by page. I gave other people the kind of beauty I had once been forced to scrub from my own photos. Ava started school, then soccer, then piano lessons she insisted on, and then abandoned 2 months later. I let her quit, not because she should give up, but because I wanted her to learn she could try something, dislike it, and change course without shame. That lesson had taken me 30 years to learn. I never did hear from my mother again. Not on my birthday, not on Ava's, not even when my business was featured in a local lifestyle blog, or when Ethan and I renewed our vows for our 10th anniversary in a quiet ceremony in Big Sur. I sometimes wondered if she ever read the articles, saw the pictures, or tried to guess where we might be, but the wondering faded over time. Like a song you used to know all the words to but can't quite hum anymore. The last time I spoke of her aloud was one rainy Sunday afternoon when Ava and I were baking muffins. She spilled half the flour, then looked up at me, sheepish and dusted in white, and asked, "Did your mommy teach you to bake?" I paused, then said, "No, I learned with your Grandma Marie Grandpa's sister." I smiled gently, but I did get my love for lemon zest from my mom. She used to put it in everything. Ava giggled, licking batter from the spoon. "Then I love lemon zest too." And just like that, there it was, a thread, tiny and fraying, but honest. I didn't need to rewrite the past to make peace with it. I just had to tell it the way it truly was, without bitterness or illusion. That night, after the kitchen was cleaned and the muffins cooled, I tucked Ava in and kissed her forehead. She asked if we could make banana bread next time, and I said of course. Then I stood at her doorway for a long moment, watching her drift to sleep, the rise and fall of her breath steady and sure. There's a quote I once read that stuck with me. We are not obligated to set ourselves on fire to keep others warm. I used to think setting boundaries would feel like burning a bridge, but instead, it felt like building a door I walked through and closed behind me, so that the future could begin. And in that future, I am whole. Ava is safe, and that is more than enough.